If you are watching and you are catching me, uh, if you are catching me in the midst of having this technical meltdown at the moment, just bear with me. So I'm going to start over again in case I did not go live. My name is Ahmed Dents. Welcome to Ahmed's Voice. Typically, this comes to you in podcast form. I'm bringing it to video, but you'll also be able to check this out in podcast form. Ahmed's Voice podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor Podcasts, Stitcher, so on and so forth. So if you missed any part of this video, you will be able to check out the audio. Also, if there's any of this video that doesn't work in the live presentation, I will have this video recorded and I will put it up on. Of course, it'll be at Ahmed's Voice on my Facebook page, and I'll have it up at ahmedsvoice.com. Thank you guys for tuning in on a Friday night. I really appreciate it. Today I asked my friend and coworker Kim to come on and talk to us a little bit about what is going on with the the biggest hashtag probably most of you are following is Stop Asian Hate. We know what happened. I believe it was last Friday in Atlanta with the senseless murders in Atlanta. And I wanted to bring Kim on and talk about this. This is what I see with this issue is something that's continuing from last year. And, last year when George Floyd was murdered and, there was a lot of goodwill that went out with that, but there was also a lot of misconceptions. There was also a lot of things in the corporate world, in the theater world, just in the corporate world, period. There was a lot of statements that went out. There's a lot of misunderstandings. And, I wanted to bring Kim on to talk about this, personally and to have this conversation because, you guys know one of my favorite hashtags is conversation matters. That's why I started this podcast in the first place, because it's kind of hard in our social media world to get a grip on things in a Facebook post or in a 240 word now post on Twitter where, things can just get misconstrued and, just taken out of hand. And I just think conversations don't go well when they're limited to just a social media feed. So I wanted to have a real conversation about this. And I wanted to give you guys a heads up about what's coming up next week. Next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m., I will have Samantha Gambles-Farr. She is the president of the San Diego Black Nurses Association. So I'll bring her on and we'll be talking about COVID. We'll be talking about vaccines. We'll be talking about what is going on with the outreach and where we stand at with the vaccines at this point. So I don't want to hold Kim any longer. She is in the waiting room. I want to bring Kim on right now to get our conversation going. So everybody, please welcome to Ahmed's Voice, Kim Heil. She is the associate producer and casting director at San Diego Repertory Theater. She's one of my one of my battle mates in this theater world.
We're in the trenches together, Ahmed.
We are in the trenches. Hopefully we'll talk about that tonight so people understand that, like, yeah, look, theater is not just, we're not just sitting around singing Kumbaya and singing musicals, okay? Like, we got to deal with stuff in the theater world. So hopefully you guys are getting an impression of that tonight if you're not, if you're not in the theater world. Kim is also the founder of The Nuance. We're going to get to that. First and foremost, Kim, how are you doing this Friday?
Oh, thank you, Ahmed. I'm tired. I'm really tired. I'll tell you what, though, this conversation with you gives me energy and it gives me light. So I thank you for the space.
Oh, yeah.
I really find that in this time, community has really been where I've found strength and where I've found a voice when I didn't have the energy or the motivation to use my own. So I definitely feel like this is the kind of thing that I like to do. I enjoy talking to you, to people like us who are in this together and trying to, figure all of this out.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for coming on. And I just feel like you get hoodie. You talk about you're tired. You get hoodie Ahmed today. That's this hoodie I am. It's hoodie Ahmed. That lets you know how the day or the week's been. If we get to Wednesday or Thursday and I'm already rocking the hoodie, yeah, it's been a long week. I want to talk about, I wanted to talk a little bit about theater, about the performing arts. I know we have a lot of our friends and colleagues who are going to watch this, whether they're watching it live or going to watch it or listen to it later on. But I do want to get into, what is one of the main headlines right now, and with the senseless murders that went on last Friday. But not just that, like the one thing that I've noticed about social media that is horrible is that it has literally split us up more than it was before social media. I don't think people understand that. I think because we have social media, we're able to just lock ourselves into a certain group of friends or certain people to follow. And that puts us in silos. And if we're not curious enough to get outside that, we really don't know what's going on. And we don't know how it's resonating with our coworkers. We don't know how it's resonating, outside of our house in our neighborhood. We don't know how it's resonating in the rest of society, and we might be missing something. And we're actually able to dive a little bit more into our ignorance. Then we have the illusion that we're on the internet, so we're seeing everything, but we're really just kind of sinking down into our own ignorance and silos. And that's why I think things get so messed up like they are. And the reason I say that is for a lot of people, these horrible murders that went on last week was some of their first peek into the rising violence, against those who identify as Asian and Pacific Islanders over the last year, especially, since number 45 was making sure he put his spin on it every time he talked into a microphone. And, I think people realize how much those crimes went up, and added to stigma and stereotype, so I wanted to bring you on just to, talk about it to everybody, and just, I know you're tired, but just to get your feelings of what you would like people to know. And, just I live on other perspectives. That's the only way I can live. As much as I want people to know about me and what I go through, then I need to know what other people are going through and how they see the world and how that resonates with all of us. So, why don't you just, give me a little bit of what you've been going through this last week, and we'll get into what, kind of, because you've been on the front line and dealing with this. You've been on the front line with dealing with organizations and putting this message out, especially in the performing arts world. So let me just, get your feelings about how you've been feeling about how things have been going for the last week.
Yeah. Well, just to give some context, so I am Filipino, and I am an immigrant. I'm actually, I immigrated, my parents did too, but they actually came after me, or it was sort of weird. We kind of came in phases. But I grew up in a fairly Western international environment. So my experience of the Asian identity is kind of different from most people who grew up in the States. What I have learned and what I've heard is that for Asian people who grew up in the US, that there was always this distinct feeling of being other. And for me, I grew up among other Asians. So my otherness was less defined. And it really wasn't until I moved here to the US that I started to feel what it meant to be Asian and what it meant to be a woman of color. And that was an adjustment, I have to say. But what I realized is that what that experience gave me was my sense of adapting to an American society in my adult years, because I moved when I was 17. And so I already, I was a full-formed human, and so I was very conscious of what I needed to do to assimilate. I went to a very white college. I was so in the minority. I mean, it was, I don't I don't know what the percentages were, but they were low. And so I definitely had that the experience of having to assimilate, learning how to assimilate at a later age. And so I learned at a later age how I needed to keep my mouth shut, how I needed to go with the flow, not rock the boat, not be, not try to question things so much. And that's also a gender thing as a woman. And that's cultural too, because women in a lot of Asian cultures are considered the inferior gender. So, you know, I had that going on as well. But because that was happening in my adulthood, now, you know, 20 something years later, I can look at it a little bit more clearly. Like, it wasn't sort of ingrained in me the way I think it's ingrained in a lot of people. So the reason I start off with that is because what I'm seeing right now is a really distinct generational difference between people in their 20s to maybe their 40s really being actively open and vocal about stopping Asian hate. So there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of, especially, you know, on social media, people are just that much more activated to speak up against these Asian crimes, the crimes against Asians, and also to speak up against racism as a whole. Above 50, you start to get the sense of people not wanting to rock the boat. It's that same kind of thing, right? And you can call that generational. And you can also call it that the folks who had to assimilate and make that a priority are less, and I count myself among that. It's not as comfortable to be as vocal. It doesn't come naturally, right? I think for some of the younger Americans who are coming up, or younger Asian Americans who have grown up in this society, they see their peers and they see their communities rising up, and they grow up with that. But for those of us who came here later in our lives, that's not as much of a inherited practice, right? It like I said, it doesn't come naturally for a lot of us to speak up against the status quo. So there's a little bit of a tension that I'm seeing, quite frankly, of elders not wanting to report when hate crimes happen, especially nonviolent, but maybe verbal hate crimes. You know, those tend to get slipped under the rug a little bit more because there's like this sense of keep your head down, don't complain. And it's the younger folks who are saying, no, we don't have to put up with that. That's wrong. And so those folks are so activated right now. And that's amazing. But like I said, for me, there is a little bit of tension in that how much can I do? How much can I say? It doesn't. I have family members who are social justice activists, and to them, this is their lifeblood. They know how to do it, and they're proud, and they charge ahead. I maybe I overthink it, honestly, but it just doesn't come naturally. So, and activism looks different too for different people. So I've also kind of looked at what I'm able to do and what I'm comfortable doing, and say, you know, as long as I'm doing what I'm good at and what I'm capable of, then I am participating. I am contributing to this movement. But it's hard because I'm not the one who's going to be, you know, burning the flags at the front of the lines and raising my voice with a megaphone. Like, so I know that's not what this is about, but I say that to demonstrate how different this sort of communal protest is in character to something like Black Lives Matter, which felt like it exploded, right? And that felt like a revolution. Like, it felt like just something was ignited and it went, poof. There's something about this movement for me, watching threads of it start to like simmer up, almost like a slow boil, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's gonna get there, like it's gonna get high, but there's this resistance of people who are older than me, and then some people who are newer immigrants like me, who are like, how much can we do? So it's kind of a crazy time in that way. But yeah, that I will say though that there was last week, and it actually took place on Tuesday night. And I was flattened by it because in the news I'd been hearing, over and over again, like all these instances, and there was one in the trolley station in like Oceanside or Carlsbad, which felt so close to home. And my parents live here and they roam very freely in San Diego, and I got very worried about them. I have lots of family in San Diego, and besides that, it's just wrong, right? It's just the thought that random acts of violence could be committed just because we look the way we look. Anyway, it flattened me. It flattened me on that night. And then the next day I went into the Clubhouse, as you know, I've been on there, and there was a room for Stop Asian Hate, and it was to mourn the losses of our community. And I went in really just to feel like, just to find some community in how I was feeling. I felt so hopeless. I felt like, it was very similar to May 26th of last year. It was very like that sense of like, God, we're going to go through this again. Like, when is this going to stop? And then feeling utterly powerless to do anything. And then I was invited to speak, which was kind of weird because I didn't know anybody in this room, but they invited me to speak. So I went on and I told them, frankly, I was very emotional. I was like, frankly, I just feel so hopeless. Like, I don't even know what to do anymore. This is just so devastating. And I said, and it's also, I feel useless because I'm in the arts. And I know that's like a terrible thing to say, but sometimes when you're in the arts, there's sometimes this feeling of like, what we do is frivolous. What we do is not important. What we do doesn't actually make a difference. And this moderator said, hang on, actually what you do is very important because, and this is him talking, because I was inspired to become an AAPI activist because of a play about Vincent Chin. And Vincent Chin was the victim of a horrendous hate crime in 1982 in Detroit. He was beaten to death, savagely beaten to death by two out-of-work auto workers who blamed him for, not him, but who were so enraged at the Japanese car manufacturers for coming in and taking, in their minds, taking away their jobs. And they got totally drunk one night and they saw Vincent walking from his bachelor party, and they took a bat and they beat him to death. And what is so horrible, in addition to this horrific crime, is that their punishment was something like a $3,000 fine. And they also had to serve like a month or something outrageous in jail. And it just went to show how, I mean, the severity of the crime versus, the punishment is it's just unspeakable. So anyway, there was a play about that crime, and I was in it, and so this Clubhouse room with this moderator was saying it was because of that play, and I said I was in that play, and he goes, well, then you had something to do with a bunch of people becoming activists because there was an uptick in majors, college majors who joined the Asian Studies department. And I guess he tracked it because that's what he did. And apparently that he knew that was the case. And I was like, oh my God, it was exactly what I needed to hear at that moment, was to be told that art could make a difference and that art mattered and that art shaped activism and inspired activism. And it was the thing that helped me pick myself up off the proverbial floor. And then from that day forward, I have been pretty much almost every day in a meeting with other BIPOC and AAPI theater artists or casting directors or just friends, talking about what to do. We had a big meeting on Friday, and it was really more sort of introductory to kind of just gather and brainstorm some ideas. And so we're meeting again in a week. But also I'm doing a lot of work for the Casting Society of America, and that I'm trying to coordinate some events for them. Today I met with the, I'm going to get the name wrong. CAPE is the name of the organization. I think it's Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment, to talk about events that we can do to promote Asian representation in the arts, and also as a response, as a way to sort of rise up, really, just gather in solidarity all of these folks who have a way to use art as a means to strengthen our AAPI ranks and communicate to the masses that we're here and we are strong Americans and we belong here, and hate has no place in this. So, like I said, so it's been about a week and a half now that I've been doing this, and I was in a clubhouse room last night for 3 hours talking about AAPI activism and social media. And really, I am not an expert. I'm just invested because it really is because of that conversation that moderator had with me about art matters. And I was like, you are so right. And I'm going to do what I can.
Yeah. It's funny when you mentioned, that, I heard you telling that story earlier this week about, the guy saying, hey, I saw this play and this is what, when I was talking to Jonathan McCory and Keith Joseph Atkins last week, we were talking about, whenever we have to make the move to going back to live theater, but that also we knew that virtual was going to be a part of that component, that it's not going anywhere, that we're going to have to figure out a way to incorporate this into our seasons and models now. And Keith is just totally he's getting used to that, and we were talking about, the thing about a live, how we're doing virtual performances now is we're having all these rehearsals and then we that and then we film it and it's gone. And we're missing that whole development stage, previews, what the audience thinks, and then going to a live performance. But also just about how much art matters. I was telling him that and how much live performance matters. I was telling him when I was 12 years old, if I didn't see Porgy and Bess, at that moment is when I gained the knowledge that Black people do opera too and have been doing opera. And then the next year at 13, if my sister doesn't take me to the Fresh Festival, which is the first national hip hop concert, and I'm in the front row seeing the Fat Boys and Houdini and Grandmaster Flash, and I'm thinking this helped solidify my, this was my music going into my dad had his old school jazz, my brother had his funk, my sister had her R&B and her smooth jazz, but hip hop was mine. And here I am at 13 live in the audience feeling what this is, actually feeling this thing. And, it's just what the gentleman told you, art is activism because it's telling our stories, which is what we're in the midst of right now, is trying to make people understand that hey, part of the ignorance going on in the country is because our stories are never told right, and they're never told in the full perspective. So that's we're people think this is just we're sitting here we work in the arts field where stories are told. So all we're asking is either tell our stories right, give us the resources to tell our stories, or get out of the way and just let us tell it whatever. We're trying to get the stories told right. It's because of all this ignorance that's gone on over the years of the stories told wrong is what perpetuates these issues. I mean, case in point, I want to get your take on this, because as incompetent as the man was, I think the thing that got buried, it was like this. Everybody was like, you see how bad he's talking about China? Do you see what he's doing? But not actually looking at what was happening underneath what he was doing. Like, yeah, it was like, did you see what he said? And it was so much focus was on how horrible he was, but not the effects of what was happening to the Asian community as a subtext. And so people weren't really paying attention to it. They might have heard a story here, and if they weren't really watching the undertow. And then you have, what is still ignorance now, after this happens last Friday, and people are like, oh, what is it, just time for this now? Now is it time for the Asians to speak up? Is it time for, didn't we just go through this with the black folks? And it's like, no, it's because you weren't paying attention to what was happening the whole time. So it's catching you by surprise, because you haven't had the time to put, substantial thought into what's going on. So now you're like, well, what is this now? Oh, and I'm sorry, that's my horrible impression of people, but damn, that's how it just ends up sounding in my damn ears. And when I read it off the pages,
of white supremacy, that's your white supremacy voice.
The social media white supremacy. Oh, why are we doing this? But it's not only white supremacy, right? Because white supremacy, white supremacy doesn't just get carried on by white people.
I know it.
White supremacy gets carried on by Asian people. White supremacy gets carried on by black people. White supremacy gets carried on by Mexican people. It gets carried on. You know what I mean? Tell me a little bit about, if you can, how, because that's what I'm trying to get, like, people I see online, I'm trying to get them to understand, because like I said, everyone's in these silos. Give me a little bit of your thoughts about how, I've talked ad nauseum about how when things happened last year, and it was just like, oh, now y'all want to pay attention. Now y'all want to voodoo. Now y'all want to have statements. Now you want to this, that. Can you give me a little bit of how you feel about that, as far as, like I said, that subtext not really being out there of all the violence that was happening? And then, we discussed it, even with work, we discussed it like, hey, we need to learn some lessons from last summer. We need to learn some lessons from when this kicked off with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everybody. We need to learn some lessons of how we handle this. Can you give me a little bit of how you have felt about that? Watching that subtext just kind of be buried, and then all of a sudden now it's like,
Yeah. It's tricky, because I understand we're in a moment right now where, because of machines like social media, the pressure to adhere to certain sets of behaviors, such as putting out statements, being contracting your anti-racist trainers, like those, there are actions now that if your organization, if your institution doesn't undertake these actions, and somehow you're looked at as part of the problem, which very well you could be. But I'm afraid, what I'm nervous about really is that, okay, so the reason why these movements, like you said, Ahmed, taper off, 6 months to a year from now, is because all of those behaviors were being performed just so you could escape the criticism of the public eye. And so when they stop paying attention, then you go back to business as usual, is how I see a lot of things, not just in the arts. But I think there are some, quite a few, just because I've been in enough of these Zoom rooms to talk about it. There are a number of arts organizations that are truly committed to making change. And that's really been very encouraging. But I also do see the other side of it, which is that people are just afraid of being canceled. So they're putting out these very, like, these statements that sound good, actually, and some of them don't sound good, but they think they sound good, and hoping that they'll be passed over, so that and they can just go back to business as usual. I think, though, what's happening is that they can't go to business as usual. I don't think there is a business as usual to get back to, because there are enough people now for whom enough is enough. Like you and I, you know, a lot of people who do what we do, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done with it. And I think that we also have more tools at our disposal to keep organizations, theaters, etc., accountable. So whether or not they meant it, we're going to hold them to it, because I think the ball is in our court right now. I do feel like what you're talking about with this sense of, oh, now we care because now, you know, everyone's caring, so now we care, when really this violence has been happening to Black communities, to Asian communities, to Latinx communities, Native communities. This violence has been going on for countless years, right? And there's no way to measure the trauma, the generational trauma of that abuse and racism and hatred. I feel like there's just no way to quantify the years of injustice.
Right.
And because there isn't, there's really no measure of, there's no redemption that's going to take it all, that's going to make it all right.
Right.
So the work is going to have to start somewhere, and it's going to have to keep going. So to me, it's less about someone having their woke moment and having like, oh yes, now I see racism is wrong. You know, we have been bamboozled by white supremacy all this time. Like, for me, it's less about that, even though those moments are important. But to me, the work has to come with acknowledging and investing in the long game of, I'm gonna dismantle the systemic problems for the rest of my life, and I'm gonna do it from within. I'm gonna do it in here, and I'm gonna do it with the structures that are directly in front of me. And that work is going to take a long time, and there may not be a whole lot of wins along the way, but I just have to keep doing it. Right. And I think that's like the performativity of these statements. I don't have the bandwidth to criticize that anymore, because to me, it's like, okay, you said it, and yeah, maybe you didn't mean it, or maybe you care more about your image than you do about the content of your statement. But what I do care about is how this is all going to look 6 months from now for you, or a year from now, or 5 years from now. And to me, it's about, are you ready to face being held accountable when the time comes? And it's all, I know I'm kind of talking abstractly. It all makes sense in my brain. But I and also because I'm working with like very specific examples in my head that I can't necessarily share.
Right.
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 But
we could tell y'all that we'd have to kill you.
That's great. But there's no way to get out of the fact that marginalized, oppressed communities have been marginalized and oppressed by white supremacy for centuries, and that's a truth. And in order for the work to continue, I'm looking beyond the, oh, Yes, now I get it. I don't need that moment. I just need to see that it is consistent.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why, like, when I always talk about the statements, I'm always telling people, I'm like, we didn't ask you to jump out there and make them. Like, like when everything was heating up, it's not like I didn't go, hey, can you make this statement? Like, I didn't ask you to do that. It's just a matter of fact of like, but you did. But you did. And that, and sometimes when you say stuff, you don't realize how much weight that carries. And, people expect you to follow through, especially when this moment is that serious. You know what I'm saying? And so, no, I completely understand what you're saying, because, and it's also, this is just by proxy what we do, right? Like, this is just, we work in art. So we primarily deal, in art and in presentation and in representation and making sure that's right. And so, when these things happen, we look at how they're like, these issues we've been talking about, them so abstractly. And I'm so glad someone shared an article last week. But it was just detailing, like, it was just going all the way back to it was just going all the way back to FDR, and was going back to the National Theater Act. And it was showing how that out of the Depression, they knew that people couldn't afford to go to theater and they needed to bring it back. And so, part of what they did was they created the National Theater Act, part of the big New Deal. And it was about making sure there was representation and the stories were told. And then McCarthy comes in with this anti-communism and he shuts it down. And not only does he shut it down, he shuts it down in a way to make sure that stories outside of the white power structure they're not written, they are not shared on the national stage. They are beat down because sharing ethnic and cultural identities is anti-American. It was literally the office of un-American activities.
Right.
And that's where it fell on, to shut down representation and when people say, well, there's no institution. No, this was done by the federal government at the institutional level to keep races from showing and appreciating each other and coming together and keeping stories of people of color down. I'm sorry, that is called institutional racism by definition of everything, word by word. You know what I mean? Like, you can't deny that. This is history. And so, when we look at what we're doing, it's kind of like it just falls upon us naturally, because we're just like, hey, we want to make sure the stories are told. And then there's that other part too. It's like, hey, I have equity in this place as well. Like, I have equity in this place. I want to see it be successful. I want to see it be honest, and there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people who work in whatever institution, whether it's Coca-Cola or whether it's a theater, who are walking around and they've been living this and are like, I want to see this organization live up to its word. I want to see it embrace these practices and these ideals. So, I think that's where I was getting at earlier, where, like, people have the idea that, like, oh, like, theater is just, you guys are just, just come taking a bow every day after work, and you just going to rehearsals and having plays and having a great old time.
And like, having a great old time. Yeah. Let me tell you something. The other misconception about theater, which is grounded in history, so I understand where it comes from. However, it's this idea that we okay. My thoughts are kind of splitting up into different categories here. That it, because it is grounded in joy and community, all positive things, that people who do the art, who are in the art, who are making the art, are sort of automatically empathetic. Sorry, I laugh because it's not true. Who are automatically empathetic, who are automatically progressive, forward thinking, who are automatically peace and love type groovy, you know,
Right, right.
you know what I mean? Because like I know, having seen a couple documentaries, and that does not make me an expert, but historically there have been, you know, these underground movements of protest, and sometimes a very key component of those underground movements is performance.
Mhm.
So naturally this image of the actor, of the performer, being like this freewheeling, um all joy and love and light and, you know, all of those things, that's somehow come through, right? That has somehow endured through the ages, that actors are this way, or artists are this way, or people in the arts are this way. But what I've found is actually so not the case in some ways. Like, theater has become just one more machine for ego, for the patriarchy, for white supremacy to endure, right? Like, it's just one more engine to that keeps those very toxic structures going.
Right.
And so, and in some ways it's more insidious because the people themselves think of themselves as forward thinking, progressive, and, you know, oh yeah, I'm all about equity, I'm all about diversity, I am all about that. But then you see what they do off hours, and it's like, you're not, or they vote a certain way, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's just like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, sometimes the thing that you would identify as being, oh, they're ahead of the game because they're grounded in a tradition of storytelling and, you know, pushing the envelope, breaking boundaries, that the tradition of theater has evolved in those tropes, that we somehow are ahead of the curve when it comes to things like racism. And in some ways, actually, it's the opposite. It's harder because a person can be so locked into thinking that they don't hear anything else, because they're so convinced that they're already woke, that they're already progressive, that they're already, you know, a champion of equity, that, and they look around, they're like, I'm in theater, of course I am. That
Right.
they cannot possibly factor in the idea that they are either horribly racist or sexist or, you know, misogynist, or just wrong about something. So I find that challenging.
Yeah. It's funny. I think when we did, I think it was when we did the first conversation with the Breath Project. I think it was the first Affinity Space we did. And I was like telling the younger people, I was like, don't ever think just because you get in the room that everybody in there is smarter than you. It's not necessarily the case. They've just been around longer and are more established in the system than you. Doesn't mean they're necessarily smarter than you. So I guarantee you, sometimes you can bring up the simplest human notion. You can bring up the simplest thing that you as a child, that your mama and daddy taught you, that made perfect sense, and it's made sense all through your life since the first grade. And you can say that in one of these meetings, and it will bring everything to a screeching halt, and you will be beside yourself like, oh, I thought that was simple to understand. I got that when I was a little kid. Like, you know what I mean? But it's just, they've been in this system for so long. And like you said, it's like, what? I'm in the arts. I'm automatically woke. By nature of me being in the performing arts, I'm woke. And it's like, no, you're not. Stop using the word and stop thinking you are. That's the problem. When you think you're woke, you're not. That should be the litmus. The minute you just step up and say, I'm woke, just put, I'm not after that, because that means you're not.
Totally. Yeah.
You know, so it's just funny. It's just these, like we always say, right? Like, these are the little conversations that we were always having on the side. Now the floodgates are open, because like you said, we just like get to the point where you've seen it so much. And then I think, like I said, so many people now have stepped out on this limb saying how woke they are, that now you're just like, okay, all right, okay, then if you're that woke, then you're gonna hear what I got to say then.
Yeah, and it's not just, I mean, the implication here is that it's white people. It's not.
No,
right?
it's not.
It's
not
not
just white people.
And certainly I feel like I've heard, okay, the thing that I wish I would see more is just more humility. And that's across the board. That's people like you and me. Like, I feel like I need more humility. I need to lead with humility in my conversations with people, because I want to be open to learning something new, even if I don't agree with anything that person represents. Right. Like I need to be willing to be wrong in my mind. And that's very hard to do. But I actually see a lot of people who, for them, that's like almost an impossibility, that they can't go into a conversation with the possibility that they might be proven wrong about something.
Right. Yeah. What I want to get into I want to talk to you about the nuance, and I want to talk about, dealing with the because I've been dealing with like the myth of the starving artist and these things. But I also want to, if you can, talk to me a little bit, as much as you can, about the project you're working on and the play that you were talking about earlier. As much as you can, what can you tell me about that and what you're doing with that?
You're talking about the Vincent Chin play?
Yes.
Well, it's definitely still in its early stages. And I just got an email today from the artistic director of East West Players wanting to talk about it, which is so exciting, because that's where I did the play, was with them. Sherilyn Lee, who's a playwright, was very close to East West Players. And so anyway, yes, the play is called Carry the Tiger to the Mountain, and it is the story of Vincent Chin and his brutal murder, and then the activism that followed the trial first, and then the activism after that. It was a play, it was so crazy. So this was a play I would do. I think we did 8 shows a week, maybe 7 shows a week, something like that. And we didn't have understudy. So I was on, and we did it for like a month or something. Even when you do something and it gets into your skin, like your bones, and because that play was so heavy, like I would leave it in the theater, right? At the moment I left the theater, it was like, I'm Kim. I'm not that character anymore. Because it was so heavy, you just didn't want to take it home with you. But I would leave the theater, and there would be people weeping and coming to me as though I was the fiance of Vincent Chin. That was one of the characters that I played, and just like want to connect with me because they were so moved. And I still remember that. And because I was so young, I was like in my 20s, and I remember thinking like, I don't think I don't think I did that. I think the play must have done that, because I don't think I'm good enough to do that. And by that, I meant like move people to tears, right? Because they were but I think because they were so moved by it, they just wanted, like as many people do after being moved by a work of art, they just wanted to connect to the source, to kind of either get closure or feel connection or just commiserate something, right? So I would get that, but I just remember so distinctly thinking like, surely I'm not that good an actress. I don't think I am. It must be the play. Must be the play. Anyway, but this play, which has also been done in New York, it's been done in colleges. We're trying to track it down. Like, we still don't have a copy of it, but we want to do a reading of it and hopefully share that stream or that recording, or however we choose to do it, with other theaters around the country. And I was really lucky enough, gosh, the things that have come together to make this happen are just a little like, I'm not a big believer in fate, but in some ways it sort of feels like, oh, I got to do this now. So I called, because so Danny, our literary manager, and I were like, how are we going to find this play, And then I just Googled, so Sherilyn Lee, who is deceased now, she died in 2016. And her obituary listed her surviving family members, and one of them was her sister, who had an interesting nickname. And I thought, well, if I Google that, then maybe that will come up with something because it's an interesting nickname, right? And so I did. It came up, and it was a page that was actually linked to East West Players, and it was a event page explaining the celebration of the playwright's life. And the RSVP was, please call this number, please email here. And it was a phone number for her sister. And I was like, I guess I'll just call her. So, and nowadays people don't answer their phones if they don't recognize phone numbers. So I thought I'll just leave a message. Oh my gosh, this woman picked up on the second ring. I was like, oh my gosh. And then we just proceeded to have this amazing conversation. She had already been thinking about that play. And this was like 4 days after. This was like the Monday after the Atlanta shootings. And she was like, I've been thinking about this play and I feel like someone has to do it. So you need to figure this out. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she goes, and I never pick up my phone. So it's really weird that I picked up my phone. It was so great. And so, and then we talked to Sherilyn's agent, and he was like, I've been thinking about this play. We have to do this. So in some ways it feels like, okay, we have to do this. Like, there's no turning back, but there's a lot of planning involved. So what we want to do is just cast a reading of this play, produce a reading of this play that then can be streamed, like I said, by other theaters, and raise money for stopaapihate.org is my hope. That's the idea right now. We'll see what happens. Oh, I can't hear you, Ahmed. You're muted.
This damn video conferencing, Zoom, Slack, whatever culture of having to make sure you unmute yourself. Whenever this goes live, I will make sure that I am sharing it everywhere and that, everybody knows what the deal is and to check it out. It's funny because, I'll say this, I'll lose some people here, but it is what it is. A lot of the things I heard that were happening last year, after the murder of we focus on George Floyd. There were so many horrible murders and things going on before that, but we know that was the one that lit the fire, across the country. A lot of the same things I heard then, I heard after the Friday shooting, and I'm going to say this to people so you understand, you might not say the exact same words, but the all lives matters mantra don't sound any better if it's coming not from a white mouth. And there's a lot of not white mouths who might not have been saying those words, but we're sounding a lot like that with their comments and discussion. You know what I mean? Like, so people need to understand, like, that's my point is like, it ain't just white folks. You're not as woke as you think you are. When people are marginalized. It doesn't matter who they are. When me and Freedom are talking about, we're talking about bringing people, into the theater and entry level positions. We're not just talking about that on a race level. I'm talking about people who can't afford to volunteer and get interns, whoever they are. They're in a class where they can't afford it, and if you look at all the major civil rights leaders right before they got assassinated, it was never their message to their own people that got them assassinated. It wasn't Malcolm X talking to black folks that got him assassinated. It wasn't Fred Hampton talking to black people in Chicago that got him assassinated. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't Martin Luther King talking to black folks that got him assassinated. What got King assassinated is when he started talking against the Vietnam War and he started talking about money and reparations. That's when they killed King. Malcolm X got killed when he came back from Mecca and decided he was going to work with anybody, white, black, or whoever, to bring racial justice. Fred Hampton got killed when he started talking to the Latinos and the Asians and the white folks who were economically depressed and held down in Chicago. That's when they got killed. They didn't get killed for talking and working with their own people. They got killed when they decided they were going to provide a united front. And I think people need to understand that. Is when you start working with other people is when folks really, really get twisted and get, really messed up about stuff. You know what I mean? So yeah, like I said, when that comes to fruition, we'll make sure we get that out there. Right now, before I do switch the focus of the conversation and dealing with this, are there any resources where you want to point people right now if they want to educate themselves on what's going on, if they're a little more curious and want to really know what's going on?
Yeah. So stopaapihate.org is actually a really informative place to go. It's a website that is dedicated to actually it's a means to report is what it is. But there are also resources there. There are links to ways to get services, to get help. And then I don't remember the actual name of the website, but it is a very comprehensive listing of so many different organizations in the country, social justice orgs, as well as AAPI coalitions, member organizations that are either trying to raise money to further this movement. And you can find that link actually on the SD Rep page. If you go to our front page and you'll see our statement, it's at the bottom, and the link there will lead you to that comprehensive listing. For theaters in particular, or anyone actually who's interested in joining the AAPI theater workers and the activities that are being planned, CATA, which is a consortium of Asian American Theaters Association, something like that. I'm sorry. I just know it as CATA, CAATA. They are housing all the efforts that the that the AAPI community in the arts and theater is doing to mobilize and to organize. So that's, if you're a theater person and you wanna join in that, that's where you should go. And there's also, well, listen, I mean, all of these are listed in some of those bigger websites that have all those resources. But I would say, in addition to that, go to a local Asian-owned business and support it. And, your Vietnamese restaurants, your Chinese restaurants, your Asian markets, your dry cleaning services, just make an effort to support those businesses, because what's happening is that those businesses are now afraid for their employees. Nail salons, those businesses were struggling anyway because of COVID, and now they have to worry about security. So support local Asian-owned businesses. And then finally, if you have in your network, in your community, elderly Asian people, believe it or not, there are residential homes, the larger homes, where there's internal hate going on in those residences, and those people are being targeted by their neighbors. So if you have people like that in your life, visit them, show your care for them. That goes a long way. Or just pick up the phone and find out how they're doing. Show your care that way.
There it is. There you go. And for those of you who are watching live, or if you're listening to the podcast, I'll have these links up on the podcast page. That'll be at Ahmed's Voice .com. Speaking of websites, let's talk about the nuance. Tell me about this. I've been meaning to ask you about this for a long time. So tell me about this. What's up with the nuance?
Oh my God, Ahmed. So last year during COVID, I was just like, I was so unhappy, you know. I mean, this was early enough in the pandemic where I was like, what's happening? What's going on? I don't know. Nothing brings me joy anymore. And so I sat down and I thought to myself, what makes me happy, or what are the things I'm curious about and that I light up when I talk about? And I thought, well, I love talking about money, which is true. I love talking about money. But in particular, I love talking about how people make money and what they do with it and how they make more, how they invest their money to make more. And so, and if you click on the Conversations blog, this is where the heart of my work really is, which is that I decided, okay, I'm going to interview BIPOC artists about how they make a living. And what that means is I want to know, are you able to cover your expenses? I mean, these are very basic questions, right? And actually, if you, let's see, what's an easy way to do this? Well, in any case, go on the website or go on my Instagram and you'll see. I ask questions like, are you able to put away for retirement? Are you able to pay off debt? Do you have debt? When did you start making money as your chosen field and nothing else? Like, you didn't have to wait tables. You didn't have to, get a day job. And so I have folks that we know, like Eric Keane Louis at La Jolla Playhouse. Rich Sublé is a local photographer. And we talk about, like, how did you do it? How did you make it work? Because my mission is to dispel the myth of the starving artist. And the reason I want to do that is so that more young people, BIPOC people can look at what we do for a living, all these various careers in the arts, and realize that these are viable careers, that these are not pipe dreams. These are real careers that you can actually do. And as I say in my, it's my blog, as I say in my about section, as an immigrant, we are often told you have to find a job that is consistent, that is lucrative, because that we are fulfilling the American dream. We're here because somewhere in our lives, either ourselves or someone made the decision for us to leave our home countries and come to the United States to pursue better opportunities for us and for our families. But the only way to do that was to look at very reliable and stable industries like engineering or nursing or being a lawyer, being going into business. So many people, though, so many Asian, Black, Latinx artists who ended up in these more stable fields. Many of them actually dreamt about being writers, being dancers, being singers, actors. And then maybe they were more technical and they wanted to be scenic designers. They wanted to be graphic designers, but these creative fields were often discouraged from pursuing these creative fields because of this idea that you were not going to make enough money doing that. And what I'm trying to show is actually you can make good money doing any one of these creative careers, but you have to know some of the pitfalls of this life. For instance, you have to know that if you're going to be an actor, for instance, there are going to be dry spells in between gigs. So you have to save your money, put away 10% with every paycheck so that when that job is over, you'll have something to live on until the next job. And that sounds like everyone should kind of know that, but sometimes, you know, we don't talk about it enough. And young people don't get the education about things like automated transfers, like, oh, I can just automatically have $5 transferred every week, you know, and you don't like set it and then forget it, is how I know someone, one of the women that I follow, her podcast, she says it all the time, set it and forget it. Because once it's set up, then it's like out of sight, out of mind. And meanwhile, your savings is growing. And then all of a sudden you have a cushion for the times where you don't have a lot of money, or, you know, you find yourself with an emergency expense. Either your car breaks down or you need dental work. You know what I mean? So these are lessons that can apply to anybody, not just people aspiring to be in the arts. However, if you want to pursue the arts, there are ways to mitigate the risks of being in the field. And then ultimately, you're going to craft a life that is just so much more fulfilling and so much more rewarding. And yes, you can make a lot of money doing this. And by the way, I should add, the other reason I do this, or another big reason I do this, is because I want to increase representation in the arts of BIPOC people. So the way to do that, I believe, is by educating young people and letting them know these fields are you know, accessible. These jobs are accessible to you. And then hopefully more young BIPOC artists will come to the field and pursue these careers. And then we'll have more directors, more writers, more designers, more makeup artists, you know, and then it won't be a question anymore of, or that awful myth that I hear sometimes. Well, there just aren't that many blanks in, you know, the actor pool, or there just aren't that many Latinx writers, so that's why you don't get a lot of Latinx TV shows. Well, that's bull, you know, first of all. But second of all, let's prove them wrong. Let's bring those talented writers to the table. Let's show them that they can.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're doing that, because you know, one of the things that, you know, most of my career in this has been in the administrative side, you know, ticketing, development, IT, and all that. But when I did come into this, the one thing I always had in kinship with the actors was my other career, which was in radio.
Right.
And in radio, like, there was always an ongoing joke. If you worked, you know, for a big media company, the joke was always like, oh, well, my key card worked today, because radio and media would just go like mass layoffs, you know what I mean? Like, and that was your thing. Like, you came to work and someone be like, oh, look, yeah, can you get your stuff? We got to escort you to the door right now. And it was so much more, because it was so much intellectual property, and it was computer systems and security. So it literally like, hey, my key card still worked tonight when I came in, so I guess I'm good for another day, right? But also an understanding that, you know, the relationship between acting and the media work was that, you know, you were talent, and, you know, just because you're talent, yeah, shows change. Media companies devour other media companies, and when they do, they're not looking at individuals like, okay, we took over this media company, we got to flip the jazz station and make it a talk station, and the turnover is like that, you know. And then plus, when you're doing voice work, it's just like you're saying, it's like, hey, once you got that gig, like I would always try to tell people about actors and about media people, like, look, once you made that money for the gig, people think it's just this glamorous lifestyle. And it's like, no, it's a grind. It's a grind. It's a grind. It's long hours. You're shopping yourself all the time. You're constantly self-conscious because you're presenting yourself to the public, which is more fickle than they think they are, you know. And once that gig is over, you got to make that money last to the next gig. And so you're constantly in search of the next gig. And people look at, yeah, no, you're looking at the movie star. And the movie star you're looking at has been doing this for 20 years before they got their breakthrough role, most people. You just recognize them now, but they started off at the radio station or at the public theater or at this or at the improv place,
Right.
and they had to grind it out. They didn't get the rent paid. They went from couch to couch and this, that. And so I'm so glad that you're doing that and letting people, especially younger people, know what these tools are that they need and what to expect. I think, like you said, you always hear that, well, there's not enough people in this. There's not enough people doing that. And you heard my story. My thing is like, yeah, when I entered this field, I didn't know anybody doing what I did. Nobody was doing in theater, IT, and box office management and all that. I didn't know there was nobody there. And so it's just like you're saying, but it's because not a lot of us knew we could be here. It wasn't a space that we had really entered in mass. It wasn't something that was advertised to us, going up through that. So, I'm really glad that you're, providing this resource for people inside and outside the industry to really check this out and see what this all is all about. That's why when I first saw you starting, I was like, oh yeah, whenever I went through my little phase of, trying to get used to the new positions I'm in now. So the podcast had to go on hold for a while. It was just too much. I didn't have enough bandwidth to put it all together. You know what I mean?
I hear you.
But I have a hit list of folks that are going to have to come on and talk to me because I've been seeing people do stuff. And this is one of the things I saw you doing that I wanted to be able to talk to you about, and kind of get the inner workings of that. Look, Kim, I know you have had a long week. I have spent a lot of this long week with you, so I know part of how long it is. So I want to say thank you for coming on. I do want to give you a chance as we get ready to step away. Any closing remarks you want to tell the people who are watching live, who are listening to this later?
Yeah, just because this is a long game, this social justice fight. Take care of yourselves. Self-care is really important because burnout is a real thing and we need you for the long haul. So unplug, take some time to take care of yourself, meditate, eat good food, drink water, really just because these issues are long lasting. The way we get through this together is if we take care of ourselves and each other. That's right.
All right, Kim. Well, I'm gonna let you get out of here. I'm gonna let you get to Jason and the kids. I told my son I played that damn Mario Kart with him when I got home, so I gotta get out of here and get to that boy before he strings me up for the weekend. But Kim, again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me out this busy, hectic couple of weeks. Thank you very much. Everybody visit the nuance2020.com. Follow the Nuance on Instagram. Make sure you follow what we're both doing at San Diego Repertory Theater. We're trying to put together some good stuff, and have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you, Kim. Have a good weekend.
Ahmed. Thank you.
And I'll see you in the trenches on Monday.
See you soon.
All right.